Spoiler alert, Redfall, objectively speaking, is painfully mediocre. But here at Second Opinion, we always try to give that second chance, that silver lining of enjoyment that you might be able to glean from your experience. Today, we have a game where every gamer and their extended Mongolian family knows is a disaster of a launch. But what, specifically, is wrong, and what can you expect yourself if you choose to give this game a try? Join me in today's tour of this little town, trying to find the sparkles of an experience in an unfortunate release. Here is the second opinion for Redfall. Redfall, by developer Arcane's Austin branch, is an open-world, loot-focused cooperative shooter set in the fictional town of Redfall, plotting you against the vampiric foes and human occupation that has consumed this town. Picking one of several unique characters wielding their own special abilities, along with various available weapons found as loot, you and sometimes your multiplayer group will conduct branching story quests originating from the main hub of the area, along with the occasional side quests that can be found in the open world and the various world events. You begin with being taught on Redfall's core systems, the looting, central combat, exploration, and mission mechanics. Loot, specifically weapons, ammo, equipment, consumables, and currency, are found either scattered around the environment, within containers which are occasionally locked, and looted from deceased vampire ashes. Weapons are split between various classes, along with the usual RPG-style color rarity, the rare of which will have more unique effects tied to them, such as healing you on executions or dealing more damage specific to enemy types. Ammo is self-explanatory, though surprisingly scarce at times. For most of the characters, you'll typically expend ammo of specific types faster than you can scavenge ammo for them, incentivizing you to switch between your weapons. Equipments are the two accessory types for your corresponding remnant slots, are found after special encounters and offer with them increased health statistics along with randomly rolled passive effects. Consumables are found as lockpicks and rewire kits, which allow you to open their specific locked containers or doors. And currency is gained from picking up literally everything else. Food, drink, materials, tools, and other goods all turn into currency when picked up, which then can be spent on stores in the hub or to purchase resources. Directly utilizing these is Redfall's relatively cookie-cutter combat systems, as a heroic, ability-based first-person shooter. In terms of firearms, you'll encounter the usual suite of assault rifles, shotguns, pistols, and sniper rifles, along with a trio of specialized weapons in their flare gun, stake launcher, and UV beam. These weapon classes, sans the UV beam, has several variations between them that operate slightly differently within their category, such as the semi-automatic firing shotgun versus the double barrel, or a DMR-style sniper rifle compared to a bolt action. Uniquely, while all the weapons can deal damage to vampiric enemies, only certain weapons can truly finish them off, either because they're equipped with a heart-piercing stake, or harness their natural weaknesses to light. Supporting you throughout are your character-specific abilities, split between 2 cooldown-based actives and 1 resource-based ultimate ability. These abilities vary between the more offensive combat-focused ones, such as throwing explosive satchel charges, to the more utility-focused options, like active self or mobility-based skills. Ultimates are similarly varied, but rely on a spent resource called psychic residue dropped by enemies, occasionally by human foes and always by vampires. The two available open world areas are separated by districts, or neighborhoods, and will have their own key landmarks and a fast travelable safe house. You'll unlock access to these as you explore and liberate them, which then unlocks the specific side quests associated to that area, cultivating to a showdown with the side boss of the neighborhood. Scattered within are the occasional buildings you can enter in order to clear out for loot, and the vampire nests that take you into separate instance dungeons to run through, also rewarding you with loot. Central to them is the main hub, where you will pick up your primary main story quests, which branch between mandatory quest lines, which require completion to face off against the vampiric gods, and the optional ones that exist simply for completion rewards. Now, considering all of this, everything sounds more or less like your usual cooperative looter shooter, a genre that's been continuously put out for years to at least decent success. So how did Redfall fumble with a formula that's been utilized for so long, with years of mechanical maturity to work with? Well, we can start with the laundry list of bugs that the game launched with, all of which with varying amounts of gameplay intrusiveness. Personally, I've encountered issues with loot and other interactables not responding unless interacted with at specific angles, loot not properly propagating within containers, ladders kicking me off at the top, items that vanish from my inventory upon pickup, pickups and other assets floating in midair, character models leaving behind phantoms, character models turning into land sharks, texture streaming being immensely slow, improperly loaded lighting effects, poor frame rate performance in general regardless of scaling, UI elements getting stuck active, of which directly causes certain character actions to no longer function. This is just a list of few of which I encountered in my quite honestly not that long 10 hours of gameplay. Now, bugs can and could be patched up between the time of review and of your viewing, but there are more deep-seated issues that lay within the engine and gameplay. Engine-wise, you'll find problems with model collision over terrain, encountering constant little rocks and edges that your character will get stuck on. This gets annoying when running from point to point, but gets downright infuriating while in combat. Mantling is inconsistent, allowing you to scale certain places, but also fails to grab on what seems like easy to reach ledges. I've had one instance of being stuck between a rock wall and building, with the game not allowing me to climb over anything to unstuck myself. Speaking of getting stuck, the same instance displayed issues with Redfall's ability deployment, or more specifically, its restrictions for it. Many thrown deployables seem to restrict your ability to throw at certain angles and distances, turning your blue protective line red and stopping your ability from working at all. In this instance, you'd normally be able to utilize your mobility abilities to unstuck yourself, but the game simply didn't allow me any usable method to get out. Character animations for both your first-person model and of other enemies also suffer from buggy interactions or desync. Often when mantling, your character arms will contort in all sorts of odd angles in an attempt to logically stick to the terrain. Enemy animations often seem to desync with their actual action, sliding across the ground or animating running in one direction while moving in the other. On the topic of enemies, and circling into gameplay issues, the enemy AI of Redfall is one of the most major failings for the enjoyment factor of the game. Effectively, all enemy types have next to no logical decision making in terms of AI, often choosing to just stand stock still, taking inaccurate potshots at you, or worse for the vampires, who will often just swipe in the open air in front of them. When at the odd times they do decide to move, they seem to pick a completely random location in the area, and either turn around to run towards it, forgetting about your existence entirely, or vampire warp towards it and simply stare at you. Enemies have no dynamic decision making and ignore everything that happens around them until they're satisfied with their current choice of action. You'll see an enemy turn around to reposition mid-battle and follow right behind them without triggering any sort of reaction. They'll take fire from you, but fail to react to nearby gunshots, or even from successful hits. Or they could decide to move across an open space, happily running into environmental dangers like lethal red gas or flaming oil spills, perishing as a result. Even ignoring the failings of combat, there's a distinct lack of things to do in Redfall other than to run missions. Outside of story quests, there isn't much when it comes to activities within the open world. Running around picking up landmarks and safe houses for travels will typically just be an incidental thing you quickly do while running towards your objectives. Enterable buildings are available, but generally contain low-grade loot, making it pointless to explore them unless you're looking for the lore logs, which admittedly are abundant. The vampire nests that acts as a sort of dungeon are quite a bit more interesting and offer up improved equipment, but thanks to the fact that they're generated from one of a handful of pallets repeatedly, they quickly become tedious. One other thing that could occur are the occasional spawnings of rooks, a sort of triggerable world boss. This is a more exciting mechanic to Redfall's open world, being at least a felt challenge of an encounter that drops high-end loot, turning the sky red and launching lightning bolts in the area. But this too is a mechanic that you'll encounter normally as you go about your missions, as the rook appearance is tied to a bar that you'll increase as you combat regular enemies. This makes the exploration of the open world bland, and even the more interactive mechanics quickly become repetitive. The loot system is also bland. Utilizing the common RPG color coding for rarity, it quickly becomes apparent that there isn't much of any variety when it comes to weapon drops. There's only a single weapon of each subcategory of each weapon type, meaning you'll encounter the same named weapons over and over again, with only slight differences in their uniquely rolled effects that are themselves bland, gaining you just some extra damage or increased magazine sizes. This blandness is going to be a key point as we move on to my opinion of Redfall. The release of Redfall is, quite frankly, an upsetting affair. Advertised as a key release for Microsoft, and headed by a studio that has, at least on their releases, came out with some satisfying titles, but what came out feels completely unfinished. Much of Redfall are ideas that already exist, settling in games that thrived years after launch, but fails to match even the tricity of its peers. Its open world feels empty of activity, the loot system is shallow, the mission structure feels like you're doing the same thing over and over again in different locations. The character abilities are half-baked, and though some of their upgrade paths can be argued to be unique in their effects, some of these upgrades add strange effects that don't really seem to do anything productive within encounters. I've lost interest in the plotline extremely quickly, partially thanks to Redfall's continuous use of static scenes with long dialogue, both within cutscenes and during story missions. The ones within story missions are especially awful, as not only are they boring to watch, you can't do anything or progress until they're completed, and they're not short. The ideas are all there to be polished, and again, they're ideas that have been proven to work if done well, but nothing felt like it was fully developed. Now, if you've been paying attention, you may have noticed a lack of mention for cooperative mechanics, one of the main advertised features, and that's because there basically is none. You can share the effects of some mobility abilities, some buffs or heals can be aura effects, but nothing is designed to be uniquely cooperative. This is doubly so, as the game at current time even lacks multiplayer matchmaking, meaning you're forced to manually search and invite people into your party to play with them. That's not even mentioning how party members only inherit the weapons and character progression when playing as guests, but none of the quest progression done by the host. And this really shows developer Arcane's inexperiences of what they're handling. Now, I don't really know if they were either tasked by their publisher, or if they tasked themselves to create a cooperative looter shooter, but looking at the history of releases by Arcane really shows a lack of history for making good cooperative games, with intricate loot systems, or even, dare I say, good shooter mechanics. Standout hits Deathloop and Dishonored were lauded for the unique ways you could approach encounters. This was in no small part thanks to the amount of powerful abilities and weapons that you could utilize to flashily orchestrate during these encounters. Looking a little deeper, however, and you'll find a common complaint between these games: the poor AI and very basic gunplay. The Austin branch of Arcane that worked on Redfall is known for Prey 2017, which did not achieve the same accolades for the Leon branch's release, but still provided a similar experience. Interesting gameplay mechanisms and enjoyable tension throughout, but still suffered from the exact same pitfalls. And while Arcane has technically done a cooperative shooter before, it was launched to lukewarm critical reception, and generally negative reception from its players. Redfall's lack of interesting aspects has effectively forced it to boil down into a generic shooter with limited character abilities, and as mentioned before, these character abilities also feel uninteresting in their execution. This brings out the aspects that Arcane has historically been weak at, and it really didn't have to be this way. Arcane has always been about fostering a power fantasy, building an interesting world for you to wreak havoc as an immensely powerful unit that can gradually bend combat encounters to your preferences. In Redfall, as much as it initially tries to incentivize you to consider utilizing stealth or to set up ambushes around these encounters, the lack of any advantage implementing these tactics means that you're usually just going to walk up to enemies and shoot them. Even trying to use environmental effects, like explosive barrels or electrical boxes, ends up being unproductive, as for whatever reason, they cause very little damage to enemies, but a whole lot of damage if you're within their effects. Personally, I wouldn't say that the overall package of Redfall is bad, per se. The abundance of bugs does sour the experience to that negative degree, but assuming we fix all the technical bugs, the result we'd be left with is simply a very boring game. And in all honesty, when the latter half of the game kicked in, introducing you to a new map with more interesting locales, more faction infighting scattered around the world, and larger enemy counts during battles, I was able to find some forms of enjoyment from the experience. But it was too far, too late, and ended too soon. The majority of my experience was already negative, and a mediocre late game was not going to improve my perception. The upsetting part stems from the circumstances that surrounded the release of such a bland game. How did all the bugs pass through playtesting? Why would anyone think it was a good idea to release such a limited, unfinished feeling game to a market that has behemoths of titles within the same genre? With the added pressure of being a key Microsoft release added on top, how was the decision to greenlight the launch of the current product possibly made? And was there any consideration of how people would feel when you launch with a deluxe edition that contains cosmetics and a promise of additional heroes, content that should logically be worked on after completed development of your core game? At least to me, it left a bit of a sour taste. In its current state, I would generally not recommend playing Redfall. Titles like Destiny 2, The Division, Dying Light, and Dead Island are easier recommendations. And for those who have already played these titles, there are many low-key releases of similar genre, of various quality, that I recommend searching out for before considering Redfall. And there's today's topic. Thanks for watching to the end. This is effectively my first truly negative review, and will probably be quite the rarity as I try to really find the silver linings within games. And again, thank you everyone for your support of the channel. As a fledgling channel, I'm quite floored by the modest viewer base so early on, and will continue to release quality content for as long as people are watching. Consider leaving a like if you've enjoyed the video, and following the channel for more future content, as it helps me out immensely. Also consider sharing your opinions on the game, or even the channel in the comments below for me and everyone watching. We also have a Twitch channel on twitch.tv/secondop. That's second op with the number 2, playing mostly games that are unique and underrated to form opinions for them, a sort of live review if you will. Joining the community there lets you ask me and everyone involved directly for opinions and recommendations. And most importantly, enjoy more games. Except this one.